So what I'm going to do is, for about 15 minutes, my plan is to talk about a subject which filled me with fear and horror when I was in it, and fills me with joy now that I'm out of it. So the subject of what I'm going to talk about is British poetry in the 1990s. I spent a lot of time in the 1990s hanging out with Miles Champion, and I told Miles that I was doing a 15-minute talk on British poetry in the 90s, and he said, well, I know how you can fill 3 minutes, but the other 12 might be a bit tricky, and so I've come up with a plan. And the plan was, I was talking to Colleen van den Boykel a few weeks ago, and said the same thing to her, that I was going to be talking about poetry in the 90s, and she said, well, of course you will talk about the Foyle anthology. And I thought, thank Christ for that. That's the other 12 minutes of my talk, and so I brought this along. And I spent more of the 90s out of work, actually, I realised, when I was thinking about this the other day, but that doesn't stop me pretending I know all about them. And this being a mini lecture, these are my notes. They're on 2 yellow post-it notes here, and in a way, my plan is just to give an overview of what I experienced as going on in the 1990s. I'm glad Peter Yeager's here because he can fill some of the gaps. He's already filled a few in talking before this afternoon. I think when you talk about any kind of particular period of poetry, art, whatever, it's kind of it seems that what you talk about, or what's of interest, is who was sleeping with who, and who was talking to who, in a way, and where that was going on. And I think for me, what was going on in the 1990s in Britain, I should say England really, because I think Scotland had a different scene. Eck Finlay was doing stuff in Scotland in the 90s, of which I was aware because he's a friend, but I feel like Scotland, kind of exists separately, certainly from what English poetry concerns itself with, to the benefit of Scotland very often. In the 90s, I think that the key, most important or visible areas or places where poetry could be cited were Dartington College in Devon, Cambridge University in Cambridge, and London, which, London's kind of the biggest, messiest place to talk about in a way. Perhaps because I know more about it, it seems messier. I don't want to sound either dismissive or like I'm oversimplifying what went on at Dartington and Cambridge. I don't know that much about it really, except to say, Caroline Bergvall was clearly a big, important influence and a figure in English poetry in the 90s for what she was bringing along to the table, if you want to kind of think of it like that. I think Caroline was very rigorous and with her reading and teaching. I've talked to people who are students and said that she was an extremely demanding and exhilarating person to be working with, and I think in a way Caroline's influence is most visible now in the work that goes on at Royal Holloway, in kind of really foregrounding the practices, research, and all of those kind of ideas. Cambridge, I knew Cambridge from going to CCCP, all of the readings that took place in Cambridge. It was a kind of time in Cambridge when the people I was having conversations with were really Carleen van den Boykel, and to a lesser extent Kirsten Sutherland and Andrea Brady. was aware of that they were publishing lots of books and had a lot of energy going on there. And although we didn't spend much time together in the 90s, I think again, if one is making a kind of map of what was happening among people of my age and younger, they were really important large figures on the map. In London was always kind of messier than Dartington and Cambridge, because more people, I guess, came and went. And my experience of being in London was really through the people I was hanging out with, Miles Champion being the main person in that. I guess we spent more time together, and we ran a reading series at the Platform Gallery. Finally, it was at the Platform Gallery, and our mission was really to bring American poets to Britain. Miles and I, that clearly was what was of interest to us, and we ran the Platform series from about 96 to 2000 when I moved to Barcelona, and it kind of finished very soon after that. It was a really weird time to be a poet. I think it was a horrible time to be a poet, in as much as I spent the early 90s in the States and was kind of hanging out with a lot of poets who were men and women. And coming back to Britain, the atmosphere here is, I remember going to a subversive reading at the Three Cups, is that right, Peter? Is it the Three Cups? Okay, and it was upstairs, and it was filled with people who look like me now, as in being overweight, having hairy toes, and the difference is that there was a room full of, you know, people, Eric Mottram type, Bob Cobbing, Bill Griffiths, all nice people, you know, talented writers. But a woman came upstairs to one of the readings that I was sitting in on, and she came upstairs, and it was she came up by mistake, and she was a woman, and it was like every bloke in the room just stared at this poor unfortunate woman as if she was like an alien, and she kind of just ran downstairs again, and that's what the 90s felt like, really, for me, in as much as it seemed an extremely closed and I don't want to say it wasn't ungenerous. I just think there were a lot of people who found it hard to kind of embrace. Was this your feeling, Peter? Did you feel that?
Yeah, well, especially coming from Canada, completely different.
Right, okay.
It was very much that certain generation, very masculine.
So yeah. I guess another example of kind of this for me, which horrified me, was you know, when you talk about anthologies, this foil anthology was kind of, you know, one of the big I should do that books of anthologized writers. There was a book, Ian Sinclair, I think, he was the editor, wasn't he? Conductors of Chaos.
Piccadilly, yeah. Okay,
right. And so the idea of, you know, poets being conductors of chaos seems an absurd idea to me. There was another book, anthology of, I think, London writers, called Future Exiles. And so this whole idea of kind of like the poet as kind of guerrilla, kind of, you know, working in some kind of way, you know, against some kind of culture and being important, and I don't know, it just seems completely absurd to me. It seems absurd to me now, really. And so this kind of mafia of kind of men stroke urban warriors, stroke kind of unwashed, hairy people, filled me with horror. Now look at me, don't hand down my body. But that was what the 90s was like, really, and so for me, I kind of clung to people, as all poets do, everywhere I guess, who had shared interests. And so at one point there was a kind of reading group in which Peter Yeager, Del Olson, Miles Champion, Rob Holloway, myself, Khalid Hakim came a couple of times, didn't he?
Craig Burnett.
Yeah, Craig Burnett, we kind of got together and we talked about Robert Smithson and all the kind of the groovers of the 90s, wasn't it? Well, the groovers of the 80s, I suppose. And we were kind of sniffing them, later, thinking how they were important to us. I think language writing was important to me, certainly. Miles, especially, maybe. Peter had come from studying with Charles Bernstein, and so, the conversations we were having were kind of really around North American poetries, and we were writers who were writing in England because that's where we found ourselves. What's interesting for me as I've been kind of thinking about this is just how many people have kind of gone missing since the 90s. In as much as, I'm looking at my watch, I can say I'm nearly finished already. In this anthology, two of the writers who were most exciting to me were Khalid Hakim and Tertia Longmire. And Khalid's long gone off the scene. He was writing really exciting prose poetry. In here there's a poem called Letter to Anton. I'm going to read a little bit of that. And Tertia was working with found text. I'll just read the last bit of Khalid's Letter to Anton. It's all written in non-standard English. And so, I'll just read a little bit of this. The last page of his piece, Letter to Anton. Look at this performance poem. It's all bleeding level discourse like what you do. Where's the gimmicks, the acting? I stick in, look at these fucking paragraphs. I'm sucked into tropes that aren't mnemonic. The more I know about your work, the less I want to know. I should stick with the fierce campiness. How can bore people better with your mode? Same with that language, textuality guff. They started affecting me out of what I do. What do I do? A lone popular polemic against the course of poetic use and transmission since the Renaissance. I'm careful of my conformist streak. When I was a kid and had sus, but I always found it difficult to argue my intuitions from working class values, because language and reason were the language and reason of a class literate, and I had to learn the language of categories to learn I didn't have the language of categories. I realise I'm being drawn into dogmatising oral modes, because nobody knows what I'm doing, so not only do I hate all practitioners of anything that looks like verse, I hate everything that doesn't question why it's in a book, the whole fucking interiorised seeking after identity, which is the excuse for poetics. Hiding in some fen for 12 years, then inflicting crafted pieties on us. Drop dead, git. I just thought, Mr. Antin, you'd like to know that you're not quite an isolated voice, if not a sad, lonely old man without my love, then furrowing a lone trail up your arsehole. There's someone in Birmingham who was doing poems with a prosody of commutative verbiage, 'cause what the fuck, I know who you are, and here we are at the interface of a whole changeover from an irrelevant culture, but nobody knows it. Birmingham, November 91. And so Khalid's letters were he had quite a strong Birmingham accent. He was from the subcontinent, and so Khalid came into a kind of scene, and he felt like, and he was kind of paranoid, wasn't he? But I don't want to say he had reason to be paranoid, because we all loved him, but he was a lovely man and a nice writer. But in the grand scheme of things, I can understand why he disappeared from the scene in a way. Tertia Longmire, I don't know where Tertia is these days either. I'm just going to read a page of her piece. It's called The Table Leaks Its Object, and it's transcriptions from graffiti found on 30 school examination desks abandoned in South London during 1996. I also realised when I was choosing to talk about these two people that neither of them, in a way, are writing poetry in kind of the way that most of the other poets in this anthology are. So this is just the transcriptions. Marcus got a fit ass, Adrian from 9T passed the science exam, I hope. Ha ha ha, I hate exams. How old was Hitler when he died? As old as your mum. Ha ha. I love you more today than yesterday, Warriors Hunter. EE in 9L did his geography exam. The one I love is S.DY Ninny, for Ninny. Forever till death us do part, amen in Jesus' name. Stockwell Park School. MY is a playboy. Fun. Otis Elevators. LCC did his exam history. What does the condom say to the dick? Fulham are the best. Whoever sits here, there's mum's jokes. I was here, yes brother, Michael Harrison, 94. Then I left the shit school called Stockwell Park School. Hyper 93, Sir Funkalot in his Portuguese exam. I am bored to death because I finished my exam in half time. Is gay. Why is it people never pass exams? Good luck. It was a bit hard. I was not here because I was fucking your mum. Katia loves Victor, Hitman, Lisa managed to fail. Charlotte, 1964. So, yeah, those are two, the missing Tertia and the missing Khalid. It's always great when you're a poet and you're young and you're talking about poetry. So the 90s was great because I was talking about poetry and I was young. But fucking hell, I think it's better now. I think it's better because there's more equality, there's more reading series. When we did the platform series, it felt like there was no one else, that was it. The lights would go out after that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just I guess have on record, is that I met just about all my poetry friends in England at the East-West reading series that was run by Drake Stutson and Thomas Evans, and that went on from like 94 to 96 or 7, I think, and that was a really great series. But again, with all these series, when they're gone, and it's nice to just put on YouTube the fact that these series existed. Yeah, thank God that there are more series now. Thank God there are more presses, more women, more openness, more deodorant. That's where I'd like to end.